out where to go if you are attending in person. There are still a lot of online tickets available for Microsoft Ignite. And if you want to be on top of everything inside data that are announced on Ignite, I would highly encourage you to attend at least online. I got you a link there on register.ignite.microsoft.com. Just register. It is for free, and you can attend online. At least attend the keynote. It is around an hour, perhaps an hour and a half, and there you'll get the highlights of what is happening at Ignite. The week after, we have two meetings in Denmark, one physical and one online. So perhaps that's not in Denmark, but we have the Microsoft Business Intelligence Professional meeting number 79 in Copenhagen at a company called DataOn. It is also free to attend. You will get a small snack in the evening and a small drink. You can book your ticket at msbip.dk. And in the same day, there is an online meeting in the Power BI user group Denmark for multi-report navigation challenges in Power BI using bookmarks, filters, and Excel. Very, very short title, but it is a rather exciting session because they have a Visio MVP actually presenting what you can do in Power BI using all of these stuff. So quite exciting event there. You can find it on the meetup link in the bottom of the slide. As I just said, this session will be recorded. You are not allowed to download it directly from Teams after the meeting. I see people trying to do that. You are not allowed. I will publish the video on this LinkedIn group page. You can find it there within a few weeks. If you signed up through Meetup, you will get a feedback mail. Please answer it at your most honest answer, because we will always want to be better and learn if you need any change or anything else. The last slide from me today to present John Weiner. Thank you, John, for presenting at this user group. We are right now 27 attendees and counting. People are always coming in later on, so that's fine. And with that, I will hand it over to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I don't know where you are, so I'll use the mnemonic that fits everyone. I'm going to pause at certain sections, and Brian will go ahead, and if there's any questions, tell me, okay?
Yes.
So I'm going to share my slide, and we're going to go from here. So I'm going to show you some links that are probably the most important part, and we can also put them in the actual, chat. So the most important link is, guess what? Everything I'm talking about is on my GitHub repo, so you can come out here and find more stuff than what's there. This is not the updated slide deck, so there's some supporting Parquet files, which are basically AdventureWorks, right? Or Sales LT, so you can grab those. But then there's also, other things. But main thing is, if you want this slide deck, you can get it from here. So I'm going to put that into the chat. Okay. Now, that's the first topic of business. Second topic is, this was pre-recorded too. So I've done this. I did this back in 2000. So that's what I was telling Brian. It's like, hey, I had to go to my development environment to make sure everything was working, because, things get rusty. You move things around from one project to another, or you're doing, hey, this demo, and you're like, oh yeah, I broke something in another demo, okay? So if you're curious, hopefully that doesn't discourage you to just go read my video that I already did and not stay here. I've been doing a lot of Spark work. I work on that right for MS SQL Tips, Jeremy. Got about 120 articles. You can go down, you can see there's a bunch of articles on Azure Data Factory. So, some things we're going to talk about today, like, hey, how do you do on-premise data solutions, right? Or, how do you go ahead and use Power Query? And we're going to talk about that too, okay? There's also a bunch of SQL stuff, so I'll let you look at that if you want. This is the actual demo, okay? Usually if I was in front of someone, I would say, hey, how many people know Azure? Okay, so if you want to raise your hand, be interactive, put your hand up, in the chat, tell me how many people know Azure. If it's brand new, fine. If not, I will do it. How many people know Azure Data Factory? Okay, and I'm gonna say a trick question. How many people know Azure Data Factory for 20 years? It hasn't been around for 20 years. So how about,
Quick question.
Yep, exactly. So we're gonna, get into that. So let me see if I can get this right. So hopefully not disconnect myself, because I'm sometimes with Teams. It's funny. I'm gonna turn my camera off, and then go into slide, and then at the end I'll turn it back on, save some bandwidth. So camera's off, and I am sharing. If you want to do the same, Brian, and then please tell me if there's any questions. And I'm gonna kick off the slide deck. We're gonna do a bunch of slides, and then some demos, and then a bunch of slides. Okay, so I'm going to hide the presenter view. Okay, so if you're curious, my name again is John Miner. I've been lucky enough to be awarded the MVP honor for 8 years, hopefully number 9. I work for a company called Insight. It initially started with a company called Blue Metal. They were acquired by Insight, and I've been there 6 years. And what we're going to talk about today is exploring design patterns for data integration, okay? And while I was talking or chatting with Brian before was, when you write a program, that's great. You get a solution, right? If you're doing the same thing over and you write 1,000 programs, not that great, because now you have a maintenance nightmare, right? You've got a lot of different versions of those programs. So we're going to talk about how we can actually have a design pattern for reuse using Azure Data Factory. And I'll go through several iterations of that and come up with a solution that's pretty good, okay? So terminology. You can go to Wikipedia, but there's, the movement data can be categorized as extracting the data. You want to extract it. And the order doesn't have to be in this order: extract, translate, and load, right? So a lot of the traditional ETL tools like SSIS were strictly that way. When you look at Azure Data Factory, and again, I'm not specifically looking at Fabric, but Azure Data Factory is its own product. It's also in Synapse, and now it's in Fabric, okay? You can set it up to use it any which way you want. So the copy command, right, copies from point A to point B. That's your E and L, and then T, you can do it anywhere. Like if you had mapping data flows, say in Synapse, which is supported, you could do that. If you're in Fabric and they got rid of mapping data flows, then you have to use something like the Power Query, okay? And we'll talk about both of those. We'll also talk about why not to do a tightly coupled versus loosely coupled design, right? I got a current client right now that they're working to bring SQL database in the cloud, and they're using 3 and 4 dot notation plus CLR queries. The problem is that is tightly coupled, right? The CLR query is tightly coupled to a C# version, right? And also a database version, right? So that's not a good design, right? So what we want to do is in a tightly coupled design, right? Any source producers, okay, or destination consumers are impacted, right? So if we have a data lake or we're landing into a staging zone, okay, customer data, and we're getting customer data, say, from SAP, getting customer data from, I don't know, QuickBooks or whatever the source system is, doesn't matter, as long as we keep the same format, right? Now we have a loosely coupled design. And that means that, if the source changes, only a small section of the whole system changes, not the whole system has to be redesigned. So let's talk about a data hub. A lot of people are starting to use a data hub, okay, or a data lake, because now you get this loosely coupled design. You have producers maybe, and again, I'm moving my mouse on the left over here, that might be producing, say, a CSV file, or I would say please stay away from CSV, maybe Parquet, which is strongly typed, and we'll talk about file types pretty soon. But that will land into your hub, which is your data lake. And then you might have your consumer over here that reads from the data lake, okay? Typically, in the past, this was an ODS in, say, like SQL Server. Nowadays, a lot of people are going to data lakes or Delta lakes, so you pick. The cool thing about it is that if you clean up the hub, then guess what? You have a single source of truth that's validated. So let's talk about file types, okay? When we're going to get into showing you how to support multiple file types in Azure Data Factory. The interesting thing, they can be categorized as 2 types, either weak or strong. So weak file types that come to mind are CSV and JSON. The reason why is that JSON, right, is all text-based, right? So the precision might not be there. You could lose some precision, right? Also, CSV is even worse than JSON because it can be easily broken. You can put an extra comma in the data, and guess what? If you're not quoting everything, you suddenly get a broken pipeline. Another thing is that it doesn't allow for things like partitioning, compression, as well as security, right? You can easily open a CSV file with a text editor, okay? So stay away from weak file formats unless they're the source, then yeah, sure, use them, but then convert it into a strong file type, okay? So strong file types, better quality of the data. You just don't have to guess at like column names. CSV might not have a header, right? So now I need to know what the header is, and I need to know the data types, right? So I have to look through all the data to find it. Parquet, it's binary. It tells me, hey, this is header. The first one's a social security number, and it's a number, and it's 9 digits long, or whatever it is. So that gives us a very good definition of the file and the data, right? It also supports compression and partitioning. So I don't know how many people have worked with Spark, but one of the things that has been really excited, and I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, somewhere in that area, I could look it up, is the Delta file form came out, right? And Delta file is just basically Parquet files, but logging. Why was Delta file so exciting? It made a Hive table now look like a relational database. We can have assets, right? Atomic, consistent, independent, and durable transactions, right? We can also do schema enforcement. We can also go back in time, and there's snapshot isolation, so we don't have to worry about too much collisions, readers and writers. And it's an open source format. So, I'm going over the spoken hub design. You can also use ADF to read from, say, a source like SQL and write to a source SQL, right? It doesn't have to be in a data lake. The nice thing about a data lake is now you got that data hub or loosely coupled design, and now it might give you more freedom in the future to change the source systems or the consumers. This one is a picture from actual Databricks, but one thing I want to talk about is scheduling, right? So we can see right here, we have a batch, and you might want to schedule something once a day. That's great. Most people do that, and it just runs once a day, and the data is updated once a day. But there are times in which you might need to do streaming. Now, ADF doesn't support streaming automatically, but guess what? We can do semi-real time, right? We can now say, hey, run this job. We know it takes 1 minute to run to do whatever processing we want, and run it every 10 minutes. Now we get 6 refreshes an hour, right? So again, this is Lambda architecture and scheduling. You can do it really quickly, every few minutes, or you can do it once a day batch. So let's talk about load patterns, because most people are like, oh yeah, I want to copy all the data over. And I had one client in which they were copying 4 terabytes every day from on-premise to the cloud, right? And the problem was they didn't realize it took a long time. Even with a good pipe, 4 terabytes of data doesn't make sense, right? Full load is a pattern in which we just say, hey, guess what? Get rid of the target, save the table, and reload it. And it's great for small size data. Like, for instance, say we got a product list and there's 500 products to resell. Sure, why not truncate the table and delete it and then rebuild it? It's not a big deal. For those large ones, we want to use an incremental load, right? And again, even with an incremental load, we still have to start with some type of seeding, right? That means that we have to have a full load, okay? And then maybe we get some type of time frame. So maybe we update it every hour, or maybe a daily file, like in the verbiage I have on the screen, right? And so this is good for small to medium size. The next one would be, if you get really large sizes, not only do you want to do an incremental load, but you want to think about partitioning also, right? How can I partition the data so that maybe it's ordered by some type of partitioning value, and then also Z order if you're using Delta, okay? So let's talk about ADF, because, I got involved in ADF and started doing a lot of programming in 2017. 18. Before then, the very first version was designed in 2015. It was really rough around the edges. It wasn't, you know, the product that you know and love today, right? The second version came out, okay, in the summer of 2018. And this was really great at connecting, orchestrating, and delegating and managing the data. And we'll talk about connecting. There's a ton of connectors, okay? Orchestration, right? Now I can do a copy command followed by, say, an execute SQL command, okay? And delegating and managing, right? Delegating, we can have stuff we can do, you know, hey, grab something from on-premise. Well, it's not running in the cloud anymore. It's running on a self-hosted integration runtime, right? And so this gives us a, you know, pattern in which we can pull data from on-premise to the cloud, which is awesome. The biggest change was in 2019, they came up with something called mapping data flows, okay? And in mapping data flows, okay, they actually went ahead and tried to make more of the SSIS, okay, activities. So maybe we can do a join or we can group by and so on. And you can't do those, that T part, okay, in there. And so this new offering brought, you know what, this slide, let's go back one, is actually wrong. It's ETL. And again, I have to get that changed. Let's write that down somewhere. So, and the last thing is they also introduced wrangling data flows, okay? And we'll go over wrangling data flows. Now, again, at the very beginning of the talk, I talked about ADF or Azure Data Factory, quote, the data engineering, okay? Pipelines could be in 3 different products, right? So it could be in Azure Data Factory, Synapse has them, and now Fabric has them. Fabric has decided to remove mapping data flows, and there's no roadmap to put them back in. So you can either always do the ELT, or if you want to do a T in the cloud, you're going to have to use a Power Query. And I'm going to show you that today. I'm not going to go over mapping data flows because Microsoft has decided not to push it into Fabric. And it's a technology that I've never really liked. It was tough to give parameters for the, you know, the target. And so if you cannot give parameters for the source and target, then it's really hard to create a metadata-driven design. And that's what we're going to talk about today, metadata-driven design. Not writing programs over and over again, but write one really good program that you can call over and over again. So at its core, right, EL, right, is the copy activity, right? And this is the center of attention, okay? Data is moved from a variety of sources to a variety of destination. That's awesome, right? But the interesting thing is the T. And before they came out with the mapping data flows and or wrangling, the T had to be like SQL Server or Databricks or say like, you know, some type of batch, Azure batch, right? It had to be another program. I'm definitely going to show you the EL, and we'll go with the T with Power Query, okay? So, and again, if you've, you know, done Azure Data Factory before, then this is all like review. I'm going to show you a lot of advanced techniques in the actual demo itself. But, you know, I still have to set the groundwork for those who haven't really done a lot of ADF work. So usually when you do a tool, right, there's a set of order in which you develop stuff, right? And this diagram actually shows you the order, okay? So a link server is basically your connection, okay, to, you know, say the data lake. So that could be a destination, right? And link server could also be a connection to a SQL Server box or Azure SQL database, right? And that would be a source maybe. The connection just has connection properties. The data set actually says, okay, once I'm connected, what specifically about that service that I want? So a data set might describe a table or be dynamic and say, hey, this schema in this table, you pull back the metadata. Or it could be, if we're talking the data lake zone, it could be the path, fully qualified path, right? And that could be parameterized too, okay? Activities, okay? Activity is basically the things we draw over, okay? And so activities are here, and they could be like the copy activity, execute SQL activity, so on. Interesting thing is that a pipeline takes a bunch of activities and puts it into a container, okay? And that's what a pipeline is. You can schedule a container, and we can also, at the top level of Azure Data Factory and these, we can set up alerting, okay? So, hey, if a pipeline failed, send me an email, okay? So we're going to do a little example of the hybrid, and it will be later on. I'll show you how that changed. What do we need to do hybrid data movement? Unless, okay, we expose the IP of, okay, the SQL box to the public internet from on-premise, right? There's no way to talk to on-premise, right? And you could set up a, say, see this dotted line to the left, Azure Data Factory going down to the runtime, right? You can definitely set up a VPN or express route to do that, but you don't need to, okay? Once you install the integration runtime, which is some software, and what's going to do, it's going to look at Service Bus for actual packets, say, hey, this job needs to run. I need to do this task. Copy data from here and put it to the queue so that we can write it in Azure, right? That could be a movement, right? Data movement. And there's also dispatch, okay? So that's how it works. It also does HTTPS, so it's very secure. Read the documentations on ports because there might be some ports that need to open, okay? And with that said, I'm going to pause. Is there any questions?
Not any questions yet in the chat, but I think they will come once you start your demos.
Awesome, awesome. I just wanted to make sure I didn't hear anything. We got one more, and then we're going to have 3 demos, okay? So I know there's a lot of groundwork that I had to set up. I apologize, but, you know, I definitely have to set the framework if you haven't had any background. So the interesting thing is that take a look at this, because this was done 3 years ago, but things are always changing, right? We talked about, you know, the actual T for translation. Well, HD Insight, a Hive job could be, or a pig, right? Or we could do, you know, something like Azure Batch, right? See the batch service, custom. Databricks has a bunch of them, right? We also have, you know, execute pipeline, execute SSIS package. So say if we were talking on-premise, we could do that, or in the cloud. Store procedure, regardless of where it is, we can execute a store procedure. There's some things that are falling off and they always change. So for instance, data lake analytics, use SQL, it's fallen off. What's not on here, there's the stop command. I forgot what it is, error stop, they called it. I was telling them that every time I wanted to, for some business logic, just error out a pipeline, I'd have to write a database store procedure to erase error and then call that. So one of the features that I suggested add, my little contribution to ADF, was to go ahead and put a stop in. Okay. So we're going to talk about...
John, there's actually a comment now from Harry.
Yeah.
Only no need to stop and discuss, but I'll still do it again, Harry. Across the industry, I've only seen the T in ETL stand for transform, not translate. What is your view on that, John?
It might be just my English versus speaking to your group.
Okay, great. Thanks, John.
Translate, transform, it depends what you want to do it. There's different types, right? You know, go back to the SSIS days, right? We can add a column, that's add a derived column. So we're changing it a little, right? But we're still modifying, you know, the width of the columns. We're not really doing any aggregation, so we're just doing that. If we aggregate, now we're reducing the size, the number of rows, right? So there's a lot of T's that you can do. As for the technology, you want to call it transform, a translate. Translation, yeah, maybe it's more like a lookup, like, hey, translate is like, hey, I got a 1, it's a male, put the word male in, that's a lookup, right? But again, it's just terminology. I do like being very specific on terminology. However, you know, it all depends on, you know, what you want. Also, list of extract translates. There's, oh yeah. So change CDC, and again, this was 3 years ago. CDC was just added recently, Mark Farmer's group. I haven't written about it yet. And again, you know, we were talking with Brian, it's like being an MVP and also I'm a consultant, I'm almost like a jack of all trades and master of none. So I'm not specifically focusing on ADF all the time. And so that's why I had to go back and check my demos, but I've done a lot of ADF in the past. So yes, CDC's changed too. So that's something to look at. Power Query's ruling now versus I like Power Query. I suggested it when they added it to the product, but then guess what? They removed mapping data flow. So go check the documentation. It depends on which company you're working for and which version of the service that's been deployed. So I hope that answers that question. And we're going to go back to here and talk about what we're going to demo, and then I'm going to demo it. So 3 exciting demos. Oops, there we go. So hard coding versus notebook parameters. So we're going to talk about notebook parameters. They're really important, okay? And they're the way that you share data, say, from one place to another. So I did a copy command, right? I want to make it metadata driven. You want to use parameters, okay? Second thing is that the parameters, like when you do a for loop, for each record after I did a select from a table, maybe the table's the metadata, then do this, okay? So I'm not going to give you the whole design for a metadata-driven system, but I'm going to give you the pieces that you can put it together, okay? CSV. We'll start off with CSV as the first type, but guess what? There's a ton of multiple types out there. So we're going to write a program that supports a lot of them. Doesn't matter what it is, let's just support it, right? And last but not least, how do we talk to the data on premise? We're going to do a little fake, session with the self-hosted integration runtime, Shire, okay? And that's right here. So I'm going to show you that I have a okay, so I got a couple servers. One is right here. It's called local server. We're going to work with that one. And that has the VentureWorks LT database with this information here, okay? Also, for this demo, I deleted my LT database by mistake, and it had a mechanics on the 2012 version because he has the big data. And so I exported it also to the cloud. So the first version, we're going to use these tables in the cloud. It won't be this database, it'll be this database, okay, which is tables here. Okay, so let's try that demo. So if we go here, this is the objects that you might be using for, okay, your design, okay? And I'm just gonna go through each of the components again. You might have them. So this happens to be in the cloud, the self-hosted integration runtime connection. It could be on a VPC, virtual private network, VPN, right? And then that VPN could be on an express route back to on-premise, and this could be domain joined. So guess what? We could use this to pull data from on-premise. That's one way to do it. It could just be not even Azure and say do an RDP to our local data center having this run, and that would be going over the internet, okay? So this is our example of how to use a self-hosted integration runtime. Azure Data Factory, I'm not going to use this one, I'm going to use this one, but it's the same thing. Azure Data Factory is just basically where you're going to be doing all the coding, right, and where it's going to run it. We talked about that. Storage containers. Storage is where we're trying to do the spoken hub. We're going to have a data lake, right? So we're going to have some VentureWorks, and we'll go through different examples of it. I think version 2 is the very first one, and then bronze, and then we can go over it and we see where there's some CSV files, okay? So we'll go over the example there. SQL Server, we already talked about the cloud one. If you're curious, I showed you how to do it from SSMS, but guess what? Here's our databases through the portal. And last but not least, Key Vault. Key Vault's very important because you do not want to store secrets in your link services. So you want to put all the secrets here. I'm not going to show you my password, but I can say, oh yeah, guess what? Who's the user for this, right? And I don't know why I highlighted that. And if we click on the version and hit show, guess what? J Minor for John Minor is the user, okay? So those are the components you're going to use. Starting at the basics, right? We always want to make sure we define our link services because, again, going back to that diagram, that's where we start first, right? So we're going to point to Azure Data Lake Storage, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to use a managed identity. And we always want to test our data sources, right? So we're going to test it. Oh, great, it works, right? Second thing is our first example, and we'll go to authoring, okay? I'm gonna close all these stuff I was playing with before. It's gonna be the most hard-coded one, okay? So hard-coded pipeline, what does it do? Let's take a look. This one, okay, I do want to show you something. ACT, MT, CPY, table to CSV. What does that mean, right? That's a naming convention, right? And dnavin, see if I can search them. dnavin. And again, I found this site on naming convention. He has this here, and I just picked it up and used it, but you can come up with your own, okay? So we can see that, for instance, if we're doing blob storage, right, for a data set, it would be a DS in format, LS for link server, and then ACT for activity, and then we can go and see each of this is pipelines, activities, and then, for instance, ACT MT, which means move and transform, CPY, I don't like the word copy. Guess what? Now we have this, and this is our copy feature, okay? So we definitely want to use naming conventions. I'll paste this in the chat. This is just one place to get them, but you can come up with your own, okay? So just be consistent. Okay, one thing's big complaint I want to tell everyone. By default, the timeout is 7 days, right? If we create a new object, 7 days, always set it to something, right? Also, you can retry stuff, so always think about that and the interval to retry, okay? Now, we can look, there's no parameters, no variables defined, okay? So that means we're hard coding everything. So in a hard-coded version, we can see that the source, okay, is this data set. And if we open up the data set, we can see that both the table name and the address are both hard-coded. So if we test a connection, it's going to say, hey, can we use the link service to get to it? Yes, we can. We always want to preview the data. So if and we can say, oops, operation, did not like it because we're using the sales LT 2019. Let's double check to make sure the 2019. I thought I changed this not get validated. Okay, I will fix it right now. I thought I fixed it. This is why you always test stuff. Okay, that's the database you want to use because I had to restart. So we'll go here, we'll paste this in, hit test connection, save it. Now we can see that I'm doing, actually, is this data factory? Maybe that's the reason why, because discard and continue. Maybe I made the change in the live version versus this and publishing it. So let me fix this here. That's this guy, right? Yeah, test connection. Okay. No, I didn't publish it to promote it yet. So I haven't moved over the ADF template. So we'll make sure we work in the master branch, okay? So if we go back to here and we go to editing, hit publish, come on. Okay, good. Okay, and now if we go here and close and discard, and now if we go and we pull the data again, it should work. So we're going back to the data set, opening up the data set, go to test connection, we test it, now we preview it, and it should find the database. Awesome, awesome. So we can see this is the address table, and what we want to do is just copy it to a CSV file, okay? So the sync, we can see data lake storage, we're gonna put it in the bronze design one, address CSV. So let's get to the right place, right? So go back here. I'm in the wrong one. SQL Server. I want to go to, nope, let's keep on going back to that one. This guy right here, storage. Containers, here. Okay, double checking my path, right? So it's this guy right here, bronze, design one, sales LT. So bronze, design one. Sales LT, okay? So this is the address, okay? So I'm gonna delete this file. So we always wanna, when testing, do your positive and negative cases, like, positive case would be no file. Can we run it? So we run it, okay? If you've used ADF for a while, it's gonna put it in a queue. It's going to find a self-hosted, a integration runtime, not a self-hosted. And once it finds the integration runtime in the cloud, it's going to run a job, right? And we can see, if you're curious, there's some JSON going to it. So we can see the source, timeout. Remember, again, default 7 days, always make it some value. And guess what? It worked. So if we go back to the data lake and hit refresh, there's an address. Okay. So the problem with this, okay, it's hard-coded. So if I needed to do the whole schema, okay, all of them, it would take me a long time. I would have to manually copy and put the values in for each one. Very time consuming. So how can we write a component that we can call over and over? So this is version 2. Okay, so in version 2, we can see now we're putting parameters in. So we want to say, hey, the schema name from the table in the actual Azure SQL database is called sales LT. And the table name, this is schema sales LT, table name's address. We're going to put it in design 2, and we're going to write a CSV file. Okay. Now, does this CSV really do anything right now? Not really, but it's a precursor to the next demo. Okay. So if we look at the source, we can have the source, but now we're doing something a little different. We're actually writing an expression. Before we were just saying, hey, go to the table. But now we're saying, guess what? I'm going to use the same data source that we had that was fixed. But now we're going to overwrite it with a query, okay? So now we're going to say select star from. And the parameters are coming right here from the pipeline. Pipeline parameters, schema name, dot, and then table name, okay? So it's going to concatenate it. And the sync, again, we're doing stuff that is all parameters. So we're going to do the zone, the schema name, and then table name, okay? So we can see that this one worked, and if we look at the parameters, it's going the address. So what we're going to do is going to wipe out the address directory. It's going to create the whole folder again. So in here, we're going to go here, and we're going to click address, and we're going to hit delete and hit yes. So address is gone, and now we're going to run this pipeline. So now we can parameterize it. We could change it and say, hey, not do the address, but let's go here and do customer. It still works, right? So that's a metadata-driven design, okay? But it only does one thing. It only does read from SQL, drop to a CSV file in the data lake. And again, we talked about those are not the best file formats because they're weak. And we can see now that when we look at the text, right, we can see there's nothing really different here. But it put together dynamically the actual parameters to get that where we're actually reading from. And we can see if we look at the details, it wrote, right? So it wrote basically 60.2 kilobytes, and we can see it's 450 rows. And if we go back to the data lake, and we always want to test and validate, we can see we have a CSV file, right? And if you're curious, we can download the file, and now we can take a look at it after it's done. So we go to the folder, and we can open it up with, say, Notepad, and we can see we have a commented limited file. Awesome. Okay, so we're getting there. Cancel. But, we can make it better, right? First and foremost is that, let's talk about how we would schedule this current version, right? So to schedule this current version, we'd have to go here and say, okay, make an execute pipeline. I decided to keep parallelism, okay, to 2. Okay, so I'm going to run 2 jobs at a time. And now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to use parameters. Okay, minimize this. And we can see now this is the address file, followed by, if we look at the settings, it's the customer file, and so on, right? It's going to run this one and hit the refresh. Probably wrong refresh, but hey, it works either way. Okay, and let's debug on. Debug. We can also, if it kicked off and can't get debug, we can go over to monitor, try it, and we can do debug, and guess what? Now we have some in progress, right? So we had one, which one was this? And again, I'm just showing you this if you haven't seen it. If it's failed, we can say, oh yeah, internal server error, and then what was it trying to do? Let's bring up the actual flow that failed, hopefully. So this was the copy table, CSV. I don't know why that was failing, but the newest ones we can see now this is running. So we did basically address, description. Now we're doing model and customer. And again, this all depends on how much horsepower I put on, there's available to run it. If it's a self-hosted integration runtime, we can actually dictate how many cores we can have there, right? So it's just using what's in Azure and it's running. Okay, so let's go to the final example. So we've done the second example. It's better than the first one, right? It's parameters, but we're only supporting basically a CSV file. How can we make this better? Okay, so next one we want to do is we want to do the same thing, okay, but we want to go ahead now and support multiple types. So before we just had CSV, but we might have for delimited, right, a delimited character. We also might have a file extension. Maybe you want to rename it. It might be delimited, but we put a tab character in here, right? Then you might want to say txt at the end, right? Or a different extension if you did piped, right? It's whatever you want to do, right? So it gives us more flexibility by passing in the file type, because now we can drop to different file types. Also extension, we can make them custom, and a delimited character. So how can we do this, right? One thing we can do is an if statement, right? So if the file format.
John, can I interrupt you just shortly?
Yeah.
There is a question around from Femi around key vaults.
Yes.
A linked service like Azure Key Vault is considered to be a member of the trusted service, and that is why it will be possible to give Azure Data Factory access to Key Vault and Azure SQL database, etc., using role-based access control without first needing to set up a service principal, right?
Yes, you can also, going back to it, you could also do a managed identity. You don't want to try to stay away from service principals if you don't need to, because it's just more stuff you have to do. So see, this is using a system assigned managed identity to get access to Key Vault. And if we actually look at the setup, and again, I might be hiding a few of the details here, we can actually, again, we only have a limited amount of time, right?
Yeah.
So we can look at role assignments, right? And there'll probably be one for, if I can find it, it should be in here somewhere. So there's a service principal right here that I used. There's one there, and there's a one there. So that's one way to do it. We've done service principals in the past. I don't see. Let me see. This is the access policies. So this is the access policies, and we can see right now there's an access policy for ADF tips right here. See the application? And that's how it's actually doing it. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Again, I apologize for not doing every little step because there's just a lot to cover today, and but keep on asking the questions. I'll stop and try to make it colorful and show you what I did. So multiple file formats, right? So we can do an if statement. We can do switch statements, a better way to do it. But I did this one as just an if. If you want, go read my article. It shows how to do a switch too. Both work fine. The interesting with an if is it has to evaluate each one, and then it's going to throw the ones it doesn't like out. So if I say if it's delimited, then it'll pick this one. But then I say if it's JSON, it picks this one. And if we go into the JSON one, we can say, oh, there's an activity there. And it's a copy activity. And if we look, now we got, again, we're selecting the same thing because the source is always SQL here. That's the design for this pattern. But the sync could be different, right? So now we got the directory and file name, right? And then we can do mapping, right? And there's no mapping here because it's dynamic, okay? So this will support different file formats. So let's see if the other one finished first, and then we'll kick this one off. So if we go back here, everything finished. It copied over all 10 jobs, all 10 tables, and now we have some type of data lake, okay? Let's repeat the process just for one file. So if we go to General and Activities, here we can see this is going to be bronze, design, and then delimited CSV. So if we run this one, and it's a couple more parameters, right? Before we just had file extension, now, or file type, now we have a file type, extension, and delimited character. So I'm gonna hit the refresh. Oops, wrong refresh. But we'll get there. Okay, so now we can see that it's copying data. And so it got the same select statement, that's great. And it's gonna copy it over. And it succeeded. So if we look at the destination, right, it wrote it, and if we go back to our data lake, which is up one, down here, containers, here, bronze, and it's just design, sales LT address, we can see we just wrote a CSV file, okay? So that's the one we have, okay? And we can now, if we were interested and we want to go back, we could call this multiple times if we wanted to, right? Let's talk about binary. So this will keep track of all the formats you're reading from A to B. Can we do binary copies? Yes, you can. Sometimes you have to copy like a zip file from between zones. And if so, we can do a source and we can say, hey, it's binary and it's a zip file. We just, hey, it's a zip here. And if we want to copy it, we can copy it to another place. So this one is really good if you have stuff on premise and you change the source, which is instead of a ADLS, it could be just like a file share, NTFS, and then we could read from a directory and move stuff to the cloud. Say you already had it, right? You didn't have to read, you just want to copy a CSV file. Okay, so I want to put that out there that that's a pattern, but not as easily, you know, you can definitely parameterize it, but it wasn't part of, hey, read from SQL and write to something else. Okay. So how can we make this better a third time? We talked about having a switch, right? So now we can have a switch. Second thing is, guess what? Remember we talked about, and again, I'm going to turn my video a little on to talk about this, use my hands. We talked about how we're going to write a pattern and then call it multiple times, right? So we got this pipeline, we're going to pass parameters. The problem is eventually we would want to have all this data in something that controls how to execute it, right? So for instance, we could put in all this metadata into a table, right? And in that table, we could say, this is job one and give it a bunch of steps, just like SQL Agent. Step one, maybe we count by fives. That allows us to put more steps in the future. So 0, 5, 10, we can insert something in, right? We can also say, is a step enabled or not enabled? So we can do a 0, 1. Now, if we do a select query with a lookup, we suddenly get a bunch of JSON records, okay? That is where we want to go. So what we want to do is go back to this example. Again, I'll turn off my camera. And what we want to do is instead of passing a metadata as a string, we want to pass it as an object, okay? And let's take a look at this object. So if we do a Control A, Control C, we go to Notepad and we paste it here, or let's see if I can find maybe a JSON formatter. Okay, come on. Let's just find something on the internet, JSON formatter. Online. Just pick one, doesn't matter. I don't have any particular, hopefully as long as it just works, that's all I want to do, and then process, and now we got something. So now we can see that we have the same thing, but now we're saying, oh, the database name is 2012, sales LT, address, design 3, Parquet is the file type, the extensions Parquet is no delimited. Oh, guess what? I just found something wrong because it said it's 2012, but I had to change my environment. It's really 2016. So that's a good check on my part because I went ahead and changed the name of the source. Okay, so I'm going to save this. Okay, so that's delimited, but you could do Avro too. And I only did, there's 6 of them, but say Avro, same thing. We got an activity, it matches Avro. And before then, now this one's better because if we look at the execution and we can see that it had to evaluate all the if conditions before it actually found one that matched and it executed. So there's some extra cycles going on here. But if we use a switch statement, you're not going to get those extra cycles. Let's run this. And again, this is the reason why we want to use JSON as an object to pass between stuff, because A, it's a tighter format, it's just one line. B, is that we could do a lookup. And before, we had to kick off both, right? It was looking at each if statement and evaluate it. This time it found a switch statement and found exactly, hey, we want to do parquet, right? And it's still thinking, and it failed. So let's see. I broke it somehow, so let's see if we can fix it. No guarantees, okay, because this is a demo, and so we're short on time, but let's look. It's error. So it's saying, okay, so the thing is it's my mistake. I thought it was being smart, but this is an old database showing you how to use the Shire, so self-hosted integration runtime. So the database name was right. I was just being too smart for my own good. So let's put this back to VentureWorks LT 2012 and talk about how this differs a little from the previous one. The other one, not only are we setting this up to do a switch versus a bunch of ifs, but the actual destination, okay, is using a different connector, okay? And we'll take a look at that right now. So if we go into the connector, activities, and we hit edit, right? We get this guy. And we go to source. Let's go to source, DS MS SQL. So let's open it up and I'll show you what's different. What's different is when we define it, we need to pick a self-hosted integration runtime. And this is going to the link server. So if we go onto this VM, okay, we can see that there's an integration runtime on here. So Microsoft integration runtime, and we can click it, hit yes. Okay, and it's telling it's connected, okay, and you know, we can go ahead and rechange it or whatever settings here, but the main thing is that usually when you set up a link service like this, you can go onto here, and this is where you defined it. So if you go to we can see now that we have a Shire 01, that's what we're using, and we can actually take a look at it. We can monitor it, and we can see, oh yeah, this is how many jobs it can do, up to 24, because 24 cores, it's running, there's an error. So it probably said, hey, the error is because, you know, couldn't find the table because I decided to change the database name, so my bad. But if we go back and run this one more time, hopefully it works, so hit OK. Actually, is this the wrong one? This might be the wrong one. Yeah, it's the wrong one. I apologize. Close out of here. Getting a little confused on which one. It's this guy right here. Okay, it's going to run this guy. So hit OK. Hopefully this guy runs. So if we hit refresh, we can see it started. Hit refresh over here. It's doing a copy. Let's see if we got the right data. So it's going from here to there. It looked like it had the 450, so it worked. Hopefully. There you go. So it worked. So this one, again, if we look at the destination, right, might be in the actual output maybe. If not, I'll have to figure it out. We can see this is all about the stuff, completed, duration, doesn't tell me. So let me go into here, sync, and take a look. So this is open, and so 2030 directory name. Okay, so what was the parameters I passed? This is the hottest thing. The directory name is here, so file name. So if we go to parameters, we can see it, and that's in here, so we had to break it up. So just looking for design 3. Okay, so if we look at design 3, okay, and there was no design 3 a minute ago. It ran sales LT address, right? And there's your parquet file. Okay, so that's a strong format. So we're getting better all the time, right? Let's look at the last one of this example. Bring this over. Come on, minimize. Bring this one over. Okay, it's not doing what I want it to do. I apologize. Let's move this guy over here and come up a little and try this guy. Okay, so last example is we created a whole data lake. Well, how do we do it here? we can do the same thing. The only difference is now is that we have to call each one, okay? So we can see this is going to populate the whole data lake for AdventureWorks. I'm going to hit debug and hit refresh. Okay. So question to the group. I'm going to take a little pause. Everyone up to speed on this? Everyone see why it's important to A, do a metadata-driven design, and B, we started with parameters, but then eventually ended up with one parameter that is just basically a JSON object.
There is a question for you.
Sure.
The documentation for ADF offers some ADF design patterns based on the best practice guidelines. However, the doc appears to be relevant to the past version of ADF, so the doc might be revised in the future to include any pattern updates that are relevant for the SaaS version of ADF. Is that correct? Do you know that?
Interesting. I have not really done much ADF work, so I cannot comment on this. I will try to, from now to MVP Summit, get my Fabric on and write a couple articles again. I'm actually doing a little Google work right now, unfortunately, so don't say the bad word, but yeah, it's whatever the clients are doing and whatever jobs my company can get. So with that said, let me look into the link. But yes, the main thing is name conventions. Don't write a program over and over again. Use parameters. Best parameter you can use is a JSON record. Where do you want the JSON records? Guess what? It could be in a table or it could be in a NoSQL. You pick. I have a client that we're doing a metadata-driven design using a totally different product, but guess what? We're using Mongo to store the metadata. As long as that metadata can live anywhere, you can write one program, and I called it the golden program, and then you can pass it a schedule with a bunch of steps and use it over and over again. And guess what? Now you just write one program. If you want to add something to it, you only have to modify one program, or maybe you have two, right? One program could be use the Shire, because we know the link service has to be different. So we got a self-hosted integration runtime to talk to on-premise to bring it in the cloud, okay? So I want to see if anyone has run into this. Anyone have current ADF pipelines, and guess what? They break because of schema drift. Like you were doing select star from target, copying to a basically zone, and it breaks, right? And you're like, oh man, I know they change stuff all the time on the source, but guess what? I don't want to, worry about that. I just want it to work, right? I don't care. There's 5 parameters that my program's looking for the report. I got 5. That's good. They add a 6. Someone has to tell me the 6. I'll change my program. Okay, so that's the paradigm we want to go to, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, and again,
I will raise my hand to that. That happens like all the time.
And exactly, and we talked before, this is something you haven't used, and I'm going to show you a technique which is kind of cool, and you can put that right in your JSON too, and it'll help you with these, it's called schema drift, okay? And if you look at, I'm going to stop my camera, and I'm going to go into this. So if you're curious about the details, and again, this is a very good point, let me bring this guy down over here. You can do MS SQL tips, John Minor, schema, drift, okay. And you can take a look at this, and it goes over the whole thing. So it goes over the business problem, which we're talking about, and you can go ahead and basically what we're trying to say is, and it's the same example almost, that we want to go ahead and pass it something like, parameters. And let me see if I can find it, and I'll show you where it is. Okay, have I gotten it yet? Okay, not yet. Okay, so if you looked in the actual pipeline code behind the scenes, there's something called the tabular translator. It's right here. And most people don't see it. They're like, oh, I did a mapping, who cares, I'm done. Right? And what this mapping does, it's a key value pair from the source to the sink, okay? So what we can do is we can say, hey, the source is a int, the sink is an int, and we're just mapping. And we can also give it names, okay? So we're going to go into an example of how to fix that problem and solve that problem. And again, if you're curious, I'm going to paste this in the link here. And so this is something that, people, they don't document it. too well, and they're like, oh yeah, it's out there, and then they don't know about it. And this is the cool thing. Like, I've had a client that I had a lot of problems with, schema drift, and this fixed it. Okay, so if we look at the schema drift article, okay, we can see we're doing the same thing. The only difference now is that that tabular translator, I'm passing it more JSON, right? That's, basically, whoops, Notepad, that's what I wanted. Again, sorry, Windows 11, new to it. So Control A, Control V. Okay, so now we got this. And again, I don't like this, so we're going to put it in a JSON formatter. So Control A, Control V. Or can I go back? Okay, I have to go up here. Control V, process. Okay, so now we can see that source is a currency key. It's an int32, it's a string. But the destination is a currency key and type string, and physical type is an int32, okay? So we can now have an alternate key and a currency name. So now this will work. Say if we have schema drift and we wanted to add something, we could definitely do it. So let me see, and again, I apologize, I haven't looked at these demos for a while, but I just want to make sure my idea of what the demo is supposed to be doing and what I'm talking about is exactly the same. So we're going to go from a NTF file share. Do I have this working? That's source file, destination file, sync, schema drift, right, file. Let's open this and see if this works. Test connection. I might not be able to do this. So there was a demo called File Repo, and let's see if we can get this to work. And again, if I'm running out of time, Brian, tell me. But I think I still have some.
I think it's fine. We are usually a quarter to 20 minutes past time zone, so that's fine.
Okay, cool. So let me search for that file and see where it should have been. So this one is preview data. Okay, so it's looking for dim currency CSV, so cancel. Again, I'm going to go up here and try to do a quick search of this and fix that file share. I apologize. Also, it looks like I'm almost out of space on this, so I'll have to extend the drive. Again, I teach a lot, but it's a passion, but at the same time, I don't do it full time. So a lot of times this, box gets used for work as well as testing and writing, and it sometimes becomes a data swamp. And so I'm just looking for this. If not, I can put it out there. But yeah, so code, packages, sales LT, sweet, see what it is added. Yeah, that's the file type, but that's not going to blow it up. Just hurry up and quickly do this. This was the last demo that I didn't get working. Next code, it's not in the tab, is it? Nope, that's all the Parquet files. Okay, let me take a quick look at what was I trying to do here, right? So we're using a self-hosted integration, and we need to create a file share, right? So file repo, and then if we look at the preview data, it was looking for dim currency, right? So dim currency CSV. Let me do one more file search on the C drive. Dim star.csv. See how many files we have. We'll pick one. We'll do it. The main thing is what we need to do is we need to take the CSV file, which is the currency file, right? And we just need to add an extra column to it and show you that the import still works regardless of it. But I was also demoing file shares here, so I need to create one and expose it so I can use it. Okay, it's still thinking. Used out of the field. I saw some data, right? Come on. Come on. It's thinking. Might be because the drive's almost full. It's taken a long time. Definitely have to go expand the drive and get some more cleanup on this. Okay, come on. Still thinking. No list. That is crazy. It's been about a minute. I've never seen a search go this long. Must be because the disk is almost full. Come on, find it. I've done this demo before.
While we're waiting, there's a question for you. I can just read it out loud. Hi, John. Thank you for the great presentation. My question is, ADF objects, link service, databases, pipelines, and so forth could be very complex, and a lot of properties are invisible in the first view. Do you have recommendations to document such objects of ADF? How do you do that? As an example, in a wiki.
Good idea. Again, it's almost like tribal knowledge, right? It's one of those things that the more you work with the product, the more you know about the product. Yeah, there's a lot of options that are hidden. Like, for instance, there was another thing that I was having problems with, and then I talked to like the product group, and they suddenly have it. So the biggest thing is if you do have problems, and again, I'm going to stop this, and we'll just pick one that I saw. If you do have problems, post to like the forums out there. Someone will help you. That's for sure. So we're going to get the CSV file. I'm just going to say, heck with it. You know what? Sales LT is what we're going to share. I don't know why it was there. So we're going to go properties, right? Go sharing, right? We're going to do share. We're going to put it here, do file pro, and then hit this. Do you want to turn? Yes. Done. Okay. So now we have a file shared, right? Sales LT. And now we're going to go here and break. We're going to show it works, and then we're going to break it. So file pro, and then if we do preview data, okay.
Johannes just has perhaps a comment as long as the question. Is it fair to say that what we have seen today will be simplified under the umbrella of Fabric?
They're not rewriting everything. It's just it's the Microsoft way, which is basically so it's not finding this, right? So I need to do see, it's looking for dim currency, and I put the file share in the wrong place. So let's fix that. No, it's not going to be simplified. It's probably just going to be more complex, but again, just learn it. I wish there was some other way to do it. So I'm going to do advanced sharing, right? Share. Let's just remove this. So cancel.
Perhaps I could elaborate on the Fabric thing, because right now it seems like it is more simplified and more simplistic and approachable, but
more expensive.
Also more expensive, and with the already known roadmap for Fabric, we can see that complexity will be added to Fabric around pipelines and lakehouse and warehouse and all this stuff. So if you are somewhat proficient inside ADF, you will also be in a good stage around Fabric, but you will also need to learn new stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I see your point, Johannes, and yeah, I can follow you along on where you're coming from, and yeah, perhaps both yes and no to that question.
So let's try this one more time. I'm going to try one more time, and if not, I'm going to do this. So it's going to file repo, right? And it's saying, where's the directory name and this? So if we go to file repo, let's do Again, I apologize, but it's been a while. So let's do this, right? So if we go here, what do we get for?
The demo ghost is there.
Oh yeah, and again, I apologize. I tried getting most of these out before I did here. It doesn't look like it shared it. Maybe I just did not share it. So sales LT, it's just CSV files, right? That's all we need to do. So let me try sharing this again. So properties, sharing. So sharing should be not off, cancel. And then if we go here and go properties, sharing. Yeah, oh, wait a minute, share. So it's supposed to have done this and hit share. Okay, done. Huh. So I told it one thing and it decided to share as a different thing. Okay, so fine. So I know how to fix this. Pain in the ass. Share, gonna remove it, right? So advanced sharing. Close. Okay. Yes. Close. Okay, just do a new directory, file repo. Okay. Share it now. Properties. Sharing. Share. Share. Done. So now we got file repo matching. And now we'll just copy the CSV files over and this demo should work. Okay, let's try testing metadata again. So preview data. So CSV dash straight. Yeah. Okay, I apologize. Again, I got it working. So we have no header here and we have X number of fields, right? And basically we're trying to, this whole process, okay, going back, unless this is source file name and general, just check the parameters here. Source file name, source file directory is CSV dash files, right? And we're going to do this, and we want to go to currency tech and EventureWorks, right? And we're using a tabulated translator. So if we run this now, again, I'm going to publish this because now it works. Hopefully the demo guides won't be the next time. It actually worked, right? So if we did okay, publishing, and then if we hit refresh, okay, so it still didn't. Okay, so let me just go take a look at the demo I have on the page. I got some more I want to do. I apologize, but again, the tabular translator is the way to fix schema drift, okay? Let's get back to the demo and then wrap up. So, I'm gonna go through all the slides and then one more example, and then we're done. So, hide presenter view. We talked about these three different types. Okay, so pros and cons, right? Extract, load, translate. All components can be parameterized. That's why I like doing ELT, okay? Regardless of whatever you do. Transforms are performed, you know, in the old day with stored procedures, right? We were going from, you know, that to a target or whatever. If you're in a data lake, you want to use Spark notebooks, regardless of what technology, Databricks, Synapse, whatever, right? Multiple pipelines can run in parallel on the subset data. So meaning subset, meaning doing incremental roads. So you can decrease the overall transfer time. So these are just like design patterns, right? And if you're looking at SQL, right, committing or reading, look at the batch size, right? Sometimes that will speed things up. Also look at the cluster size in Spark. So there's always ways to do the performance tuning and click the little knobs to make it go faster, okay? Let's talk about ETL, okay? So the problem with this, and again, this is going away, okay, in you know, Fabric, but it's there in both ADF and in Synapse, okay? You can do mapping data flows. And so basically under the hood, it actually creates some syntax using the Spark engine, right? So while Preambs is supported for data flows, the engine cannot handle dynamic destinations. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't really get a good adoption of it. And also, like I said, it's deprecated now in Fabric, so eventually it'll go away. The 16 additional pipelines, main thing is the Wrangler data flows, okay, was released in 2021. And that's based upon the Power Query interface and M language, okay? And I've seen some issues with doing like, a merge using it, but if you just doing regular data wrangling, it works really well, okay? And we're going to do an example of that. I'm going to skip right over this. If you're curious, go look at the different types of activities you can use in a mapping data flow. So for instance, you can do a join, you can do, say, an aggregation, filter, so on. How about the pros and cons of doing ETL, right? Main thing is it can't be parameterized. That's action one. There is options on partitioning because you're using Spark underneath the hood, as well as batch size and isolation level. The biggest thing is to make sure that your TTL is acceptable value. You don't want to run a bunch of pipelines and find out that under the hood, the Databricks cluster that you have has to start up and start down, so on. Just remember there's an overhead on parallelism of data streams, right? So the copy activity sometimes can be faster on a smaller data set than a larger data set, okay? And, advanced lookups and transforms can now be used with the data flows, and that's a pro, right? It's not a con. I just want to do a cost. If you look at the cost on monthly, data flows versus just a regular ADF using the copy command and doing the T at some places about $262 a month. The Spark cluster can add a bunch of additional overhead depending on how long you use it and how many programs you're running. Okay, so example, I'm not going to do the mapping data flow. Again, it's deprecated, not going to focus on that, but we're going to do wrangling, which is kind of cool, right? And then we'll talk about the summary. Okay, so the wrangling data flow, we're going to do something that, is coming up in the Americas. It's called the Super Bowl, right? So if we go to Super Bowl, okay, and we can first say, hey, guess what? We want to take a CSV, right? A CSV file, right? And then we want to clean it up. And so we can see this CSV has like a bunch of stuff in here that's wrong. Like, hey, I want the date, but it has all this garbage in it, right? So what we can do now is we can run through the steps in the M query language, right? And if we're curious, we can actually even hit the advanced editor and look at the language, right? So the very first one is we're saying, hey, replace text with games, right? And then we're looking for character return in line feed, right? And then we're after line 50, we're going to skip some, and then we're going to replace winning team, and so on. So we can see all the transformations here, right? But we can also go here and hit each step, right? And we can see that this replace value is character return line feed, right? And we want to replace with nothing, so we're getting rid of all the bad data, right? And this is step one, right? And I happen to label them, right? That's step two, and so on. The final step is we can see the data is really cleaned up now, right? So we got the game, the dates, the scores, the cities, right? The attendance. So we can see that data is totally different from the source data, right? Source data, guess what? We got some garbage there. Got this, right? Losing team had records. And then guess what? We go all the way down. Cleanup team, guess what? We don't have the venue. Losing team got the score, so it's a lot cleaned data, okay? So that's how we did it. How did we get the data there? Well, remember, Power Query and all these things really work great when they're in the cloud, right? So you have to still get it to the cloud. So the part one of the article is, you know what? We can go ahead and we can basically, that's the data sets. This one up here, this guy, and this one. So now what we can do is we can actually use a source, and the source is, guess what? This one's doing ADLS. Okay. Let's see. Originally, it comes from the web. This is the one right here. So this one goes from the web as a source and puts a sync into a table, data set, right? DS, Azure Sync. And then this one did a a file to the data sync. So I at one point just dropped it down to a file to get it to work. Okay, but again, you can design it in any which way you want. How do we put it into a pipeline? So now what we're going to do is we're going to copy, right, the source, which is now a web. So this is where it's coming in. So we're going to get the web file, right? And if we look at this, open it, right, preview it, this is going to go out to the internet and grab it, okay? So let's do the data. If you're curious, that's our raw data, right? Where did it come from? You always want to look at the data set, right? So web. And if we look at our link services, we can see that the link services is going to be Wikipedia, right? So we set it up using a self-hosted integration runtime, and it's going out to here, okay? So now that we can do the web, and the web has to be on self-hosted integration runtime, I don't think it works on the integration one. We want to delete the directory, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the Silver directory, and we're going to clean it up. We're going to run this Power Query. We can also tell it what type of compute it is, right? So memory optimized, general, and we can give it core. We can also tell it if we wanted staging or not, okay? So again, let me double check the destination. So this one's going to delete the Silver. And if we look at, it's actually deleting Silver directory, it says. So file and path, so preview data, where is this going? Okay, back to here, source, sync, run, Super Bowl, pocket, okay. So if we look at Silver, so sales LT, I don't know why it doesn't, I don't have it there, so I'm just gonna run it then. Okay, debug. Okay, this is our last demo. I'm gonna wrap up, sorry running late. Let's go over it. So Azure Data Factory supports two types of things, ELT and ETL design, right? So ETL design, in the future, you'll be using Power Query, okay? So you have to get used to using Power Query. If you want to do ELT design, then you can copy from one place to another, but the T has to be something else, say like Synapse, right? So the Spark engine and Fabric you could run, right? Remember the components stop backwards, so link services, connection, data sets, what you connect into, so like a table schema, activities, copy, pipelines, group, right? A lot of times in the past, when we go to an RDBMS, we'll use a stored procedure to do the T. If it's Databricks, then we'll use a notebook. I'm not going to talk about mapping data flows because it's deprecated, okay? At least in Synapse. So let's talk about the summary. Is there any right way or wrong way to create an ETL or ELT process? Here's some questions you should ask. Does the process accurately perform the data movement and translation? Well, if it does, then who cares, right? Does the process execute in a given time frame using a reasonable amount of resources? So talking about costs and time, right? Sure, if it does, then it's great. What happens if it needs to scale, right? Say I work for Domino's, and during that Super Bowl, guess what? I get a lot of pizzas. So you need to worry about scaling. Does the cost meet the monthly operating budget? If so, then great. So if you can answer those questions to your manager and or business line support, then guess what? You can find out that, yeah, the solution's great. In summary, there's many different ways to process stuff as a developer, to move and transform data. And then there's a bunch of references. So I got DNAVin, pipelines, mapping data flows, wrangling, integration runtime. And at this point, I'm going to show you the results of the last demo, and then I'm going to open it up. So we can see this ran, right? And if we look under Silver, hopefully it created a directory, maybe not. Wonder where it went. I apologize, but let's look at the run. Debug. Okay, queued. I thought this ran. Again. I must have queued it again. Let's look where it went. Let me kill it because it's gonna kill it anyways. Any questions?
Not in the chat, no. No, not in the chat. No. So.
And maybe it's just having a bad day. Let's see what's here. Web table. It looks like it's stuck on this page. So for some reason it's not loading it. I will definitely, after this, take a look at it. I'm curious, maybe when I get back from vacation. But yeah, it should have copied this query. You can see that the transformations work fine because we can look at it against the static data file. The thing is, this might be something with the translation that's going on. So if we went down to Power Query, go here, you can see, did it delete the file? Yeah, it deleted the file. Still thinking. Come on, is it running? There's nothing, you know, you'll have to see is sometimes it runs a little slow. It's still there, it's just not copying over the file. So anyways, so that is the end of the presentation. I'm going to share my camera and stop sharing. Any questions?
Yeah, if you have any questions from you as attendee, please write them in the chat and we will have them answered here before we end this meeting.
Yep, awesome.
And thank you, John. You actually learned me how to handle schema drift, and that's great. Yeah, I perhaps I knew a bit of it, but I haven't had the time to
take a look at the article and run through it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry the demo didn't work, but the coolest thing is like take the demo. It's based on the same thing. Take the CSV file for currency, load it, should work, and then bring it into like Notepad on Excel, add an up field, put some bogus data in it, like, you know, flag and put zeros and ones, save that again, and then run it again. And guess what? That tabular translator will save your bacon. That way you don't have to fix files when people change formats.
Exactly. Yeah, great.
I hate CSV, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So last chance to get questions, and if no one is there, then I will say a huge thank you, John, for this session, and I hope to see you again at least at MVP Summit.
Yes. I'll buy you a beer when we see you there.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me at your user group. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem, John. And have a great evening. In Denmark, it is evening now. I don't know what it is over in the US, but yeah.
It's a rainy day. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
The video. So I will show you this one. Brian, you'll be getting to the group once it's published, correct?
Yeah, I'll publish it on the LinkedIn group. I just showed you that on the slides. And if you follow the LinkedIn group called Fabric User Group Denmark, then you'll see all the announcements and all the videos. Yeah. Yep,
I dropped some links in there too. So excellent.
Great, thank you. So
enjoy your ADF pipelines. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.